Check. Good morning. Well, we're glad to have you joining us here this morning at Refinery Church. Whether you're here in person with us or joining us online, welcome. We're going to start off here with some music. It's been a long week for me, so I am sitting this morning. So if you would like to sit, then please feel free. But otherwise, this would be your time to stand and join us for some songs here.
Every tear there is a promise, a love that never lets me go. For every doubt your word speaks louder, and I will trust in you alone. Hands to the sky, heart open wide, I stand in awe of you. All my sin washed away on that glorious day. I stand in awe of you. Where there was fear, now there is freedom. When I was lost, you made a way. Now mercy triumphs over judgment. When you rose up from that grave. When you rose up from that grave. Hands to the sky, heart open wide, I stand in awe of you. All my sin washed away on that glorious day. I stand in awe of you. Oh, the wonder of it all, King who left his throne from heaven to die for me. Now death can't hold me down. Your resurrection power is bursting alive in me. Oh, the wonder of it all, King who left his throne from heaven to die for me. Now death can't hold me down. Your resurrection power is bursting alive in me. Hands to the sky, heart open wide, I stand in awe of you. stand in awe of you. All my sin washed away on that glorious day. I stand in awe, I stand in awe of you.
I see angels praising your holy name. I sing praises, I sing praises. I give you honor, worthy Jesus. I see glory falling in this place, and I see hope restored, the healing of all disease. And I sing praises, I sing praises. I give you honor, worthy Jesus. And we give you praise and all of the honor. You are a God, the one we live for. We give you praise, all of the glory, God. And we give you praise and all of the honor. You are God, the one we live for. We give you praise, all of the glory, God. I see glory falling in this place, and I see hope restored, the healing of all disease. And I sing praises, I sing praises. I give you honor, worthy Jesus. And we give you praise and all of the honor. You are God, the one we live for. We give you praise, all of the glory, God. And we give you praise and all of the honor. You are God, the one we live for. We give you praise, all of the glory, God. And all of the glory, and all of the glory. Let your presence fill this place. Let heaven come. Let your angels be released. Let heaven come. We'll worship at your feet. Let heaven come. Face to face we want to meet. Let heaven come. 'Cause we give you praise and all of the honor. You are God, the one we live for. We give you praise, all of the glory, God. And we give you praise and all of the honor. You are God, the one we live for. We give you praise, all of the glory, God. And all of the glory,
too long on my own, and I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go, and I see it now. I'm laying it down. I know that I need you. I run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You saw my condition, had a plan from the start. Your Son for redemption, the price for my heart. And I don't have a context for that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, 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 and again and again. Oh, 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 my heart has been in your sights long before my first breath, running into your arms, is running to life from death. And I feel this rush deep in my chest. Your mercy is calling out, and just as I am, you pull me in, and I know I need you now. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Whoa, 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 and again and again. Whoa, whoa, oh, and again and again.
Just join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to lift you up this morning, God, and we just want to praise your name and to just keep you at the front of our minds, God. Just no matter what season we're going through, Lord, and just whatever is happening for us, we just want to continue to turn to you, God, and we just want to continue to use you as our rock and our anchor and our foundation in life, Lord, and just that we can always remember that you are there. And that you do have a grand master plan in place, Lord, that we can always rely on. And God, I just pray that we can give up all our anxiety and our fear and loneliness to you, God, and that you will just continue to provide for us and to be there, and that we can just be strong in prayer and grow that relationship with you. And Lord, it's just in your name that I want to pray this morning. Amen.
Well, good morning. Oh my goodness, it is a very good morning. I'm telling you, it is so nice to be back. I don't know, maybe a little bit of house light, just so I can see if there's somebody here that I'm talking to. There is people in the room because I can hear somebody cheering and yelling and stuff. So yeah, it's good. It's so great to be here with you today. I honestly, I know I say that every time I'm here. It's especially meaningful for me today. Some of you know I missed the last couple of weeks here. I did have a cold that started as a cold, and that it was not COVID. I was tested, all that, and you can't get a cold or anything these days. Don't cough, because people are going to think that you got the plague. Anyhow, but I got laryngitis, and that does happen to me when I get colds. And I'm telling you, a preacher with laryngitis. Yeah, well, a preacher's wife with laryngitis. Now that's a different story. And anyhow, no, it was. I'll say this: I'm very appreciative to the crew at the back and the folks who have set up everything in here so that we can do online services. I like the last couple of weeks. I'm telling you, I was so appreciative of that. I watched TV on Sunday mornings, and I watched what you got to see. And here's what I discovered with that. It is just not the same. I don't know, if you're online watching right now, there's a bunch of no's in the audience. I want you to know that. It's not the same. Watching TV on Sunday mornings is not the same as engaging and connecting with the family here. And I long for this, and I'm so thankful to be back here with you guys here today. And I do want to say a word to those who are watching online. And I've talked to several people, and I know that there's situations and realities for people and reasons why and such. But let me say this, is that it is, the church is a relational deal. It starts with a relationship with Jesus Christ, and it extends to the relationships that you have with other people. Early on when we were starting this church, I got to tour a church in Chicago that is doing just some amazing, amazing ministry things, and they talked about the importance of to be seen, to see and be seen, to know and be known, to love and be loved, and to serve and be served. I could not do that from the comfort of my living room the last couple of weeks. I miss this so much. The church family is a relational deal, and if you're watching online, I want to both challenge you and encourage you to engage and reconnect. For some of you, it's an engagement. Some of you started watching during this time of COVID, and you were not engaged with our church family. And let me tell you that the end goal is not that you would watch TV, would watch online Refinery Church on Sunday mornings, and that we would never engage. The goal is that would be a starting point, and then we could move from there to actually connecting and engaging with people. So I want to challenge you and encourage you to take that step. And those of you who have not yet re-engaged, I'm going to challenge and I'm going to encourage you to take that step. And I know that some of you would push back on that, and it's uncomfortable and stuff. Here's one of the things I've discovered is we're people of routine, right? I'm not going to say habit, I'm going to say routine. We're people of routine. And it is so, you've got routines, right? Every morning, you know what your morning looks like. Your clock goes off at whatever time, and you do your breakfast thing, and your shower thing, and your hair thing, or your non-hair thing, you're just getting ready thing, right? And then you've got your route to work, or you're maybe working from home, maybe that's your, whatever. You've got a routine, and you know what it is, and you know what Monday nights are, and Tuesday nights usually, and so on and so forth. We build routine. And it's so easy over the last 18, 19 months, I think now with COVID, to build new routine. And so I'm just going to challenge you. I'm just going to encourage you. For those of you who are able to, boy, would we love to see you and reconnect or engage maybe for the first time with some of you who have just started participating and connecting with this church through our online ministry. We'd love to see you. I'm going to leave it at that. I do need to say also a huge thank you to both Mark and Brett, who stepped in and preached here the last couple of Sundays. Oh yeah. Here's how bad things are for me. I was thinking, man, if Mark went down and we needed somebody to step in and do children's stuff, whoa, I'm probably not that guy, right? And then I started thinking, man, if Brett went down and we needed somebody to lead the music, you know what? Some of you would, everybody would show up. You'd want to see me doing that, but then you wouldn't stay for long. You'd have an early lunch. Let's just put it that way. I am so thankful to those guys and the opportunities that we have here to have people step in and that. Man, the church does not rely on any one person, does it? I mean, it's so great to be here. I love you guys. This is a great, great morning to be here. Today we're in part 4 of this series that we've been in for now the last 3 weeks. This is week number 4, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. Some of you probably would be more interested if it was fewer decisions and fewer regrets. You don't want better regrets, right? But it's all about better decisions and fewer regrets. If you've been tracking along with us for the last several weeks, you know the big idea in this series is there's this relationship between good questions and good decisions. And you know that. It's just we're talking about something that we know to be true, that we know from our own experience, we know from the experience of others that that's the case. Just good decisions, or good questions, usually lead to better decisions. The more questions you have, the more equipped you are to make a better decision. And so we understand that. That's not nothing new for any of us. But here's the deal with all of this. I am convinced, absolutely convinced, if you would get in the habit, and here's part of the routine sort of stuff for us, if you would build this habit, build this routine of asking, and answering honestly, and then actually acting on your answer to 5 questions, that you will make better decisions, and as a consequence of making better decisions, you will live with fewer regrets. And not only that, but your life will be better that way. But the people who look to you, the people who look up to you, the people who depend on you, their lives will be better as well. Because we've said this every week. Mark was saying it, Brett was saying it as well. We are not the only people who are impacted by our decisions, right? You know that. This is, again, we're not talking about anything we don't know to be true. We are not the only ones who are impacted by the decisions we make. In fact, the truth is we're not the only ones who are impacted by the regrets that we sometimes live with, right? So in part 1, I had suggested to you and encouraged you and challenged you on that to memorize a verse from the book of Proverbs in the Bible, just a book that's full of these wise sayings. And hopefully some of you have done this over the last few weeks. The saying goes like this. Some of you could say it right back to me. If you want to help, on the Welcome Center table back there's cards that have this verse on it, so you can put it somewhere where you would see it regularly, or maybe in your wallet, or whatever the case may be. But here's how it goes. It says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge." Yeah, the prudent see danger coming. They look ahead at things. They're not just in the here and now, but they're thinking ahead and they're looking to the big picture, and they see danger on the horizon and they take refuge. They take some appropriate sorts of action steps. The verse continues, "The prudent see danger and they take refuge, but the simple," the naive, I guess we could say, "they just keep on going and they end up paying the price." They end up suffering, depending on your version of the Bible, your English language translation. It might say they end up suffering, or they end up suffering for it, or they end up paying the penalty. I like that because I'm a sports guy and I understand penalties. They end up paying the penalty as a result of just keeping on going. They see the danger ahead, or they don't even stop. They're just in the here and now, and they don't even realize that there's so much more about the decisions they're making today and how it's going to impact and affect tomorrow and the next day and next week and next year and the rest of their lives maybe. And they just keep going, and they pay the price for it. And so that's what we've been talking about a little bit, and that's why I encourage you to memorize that verse. The reason I wanted you to commit that verse to memory is it as straightforward as the 5 questions are that we're looking at. And that's, if you're just joining us, we've been looking at different questions each week. There's 5 of them. And they're as straightforward as those questions really are, they're going to bring you into conflict with what we're kind of referring to as the sales associate in your head. You know, that kind of voice, or not voice, but that deal in your head, that wrestle that you go on with sometimes that wants you to act right now, that wants you to decide fast, make a decision quickly. It wants you to focus on the immediate rather than on the big picture, or focus on the immediate rather than on the ultimate. This verse from Proverbs, it's a bit of a reminder to look beyond just the moment, to not look away when there is potential danger on the horizon. And so these 5 questions that we're talking about, 1 per week, they're really designed to help each of us just kind of slow down a little bit, to push the pause button a little bit, and to think and to look ahead, and is there some danger on the horizon that I should be aware of before just trudging ahead? Or should I be taking some appropriate action steps right now to hopefully avoid that danger on the horizon? Now, again, just as a bit of a recap, our first question a couple of weeks ago, we called it the integrity question. Some of you will remember this. The integrity question is all about, am I being honest with myself? And then we took it a step further and we added a little word onto the end of that. Some of you will remember, it's not just am I being honest with myself, it's being honest with myself really. You know how somebody comes and talks to you, even on a Sunday morning or whatever, and it's like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm good. But if they were to say, how are you doing really, there might be a little bit more something going on there, right, that we don't generally talk about. And so we said, it's not just a matter of am I being honest with myself, but ask yourself, am I being honest with myself really? Am I, maybe that voice in my head is trying to sell me on something in the immediate that I'm going to regret later on, maybe this afternoon, maybe next week, maybe next month, whatever the case. Our second question, it was what we call the legacy question. And the legacy question is really this. It's really a matter of, what story do I want to tell? And insert your name there. What story do you want to tell? When the decision that you are sort of in the process of making right now, when you're in the process of that whole decision kind of thing, and when that gets reduced down to a story that you tell, and that's later on in the future, right? You're making decisions today, and then later on you're going to look back and you'll be telling the story, and your life will tell the story of all of the decisions that fell before you, right? That came before, all of those different decisions that you make. When that decision that you are in the process of making right now is sort of reduced down to just the story of your life and the story that your life tells, what story do you want to tell? What story do you want to tell? Because then it allows us to backtrack a little bit and go, okay, then I need to make this decision, that decision, and so on and so forth, right? So we talked about that. The good news about that too is that you get to decide. As far as it is up to you, you get to write the story of your life just one decision at a time. One decision at a time. And then eventually you'll look back and all those decisions will lead to the story of your life. And that brings us now to the third question. And today we're going to call this the conscience question. The Jiminy Cricket kind of question, right? If you're familiar with the Pinocchio story, some of us look at Jiminy Cricket as being a little bit of that conscience. This is our conscience question. And by conscience, and here's how I'm going to talk about it here today. It's kind of that internal, and I'll use the word tension. It's the internal kind of pull, that tension that is competing for your attention and my attention at those points of decision. That tension that's pulling whenever it comes to a decision point for you. And so our third question, really a question that we can ask anytime we're asking a decision of any magnitude. It could be a really small sort of decision. Should I make this purchase? It could be a really big sort of decision. Should I engage in marriage? Should I take a step towards that, right? Of any magnitude. The question is there a tension within this that deserves my attention? Is there a tension that deserves my attention? And let me explain that, because sometimes an option that we're considering, a decision point that we're considering, and it's, we've got sort of different options on this decision. We can go route A or B or whatever it is. An option that we're considering, sometimes that creates a bit of a tension inside of us. We might be leaning towards option A, but there's that kind of tension where it doesn't seem exactly right. There's something that doesn't feel, it gives us that sort of pause moment. It causes us to hesitate a little bit. It's kind of like a flag goes up, and it might be a red flag a little bit, right? And there's this there's kind of this internal sense of, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know really what it is. It seems like this should be straightforward. It seems like I should be confident in taking this step. And I'm not really sure, but something doesn't feel quite right. There's something, it's just kind of bugging me a little bit. Let me tell you, when that happens, and here's the big deal for today, when that happens, you owe it to yourself to pay attention. You owe it to yourself to pause and to pay attention to that tension. Don't ignore it. Don't brush by it. Don't rush by it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Pay attention to it. Let it bother you. Sit in that tension spot. Let it bother you a little bit. And the problem with the whole deal, and the problem for us as especially North Americans, this whole idea is a problem for us because it's not easy for us to do that. And we do have that kind of sales associate voice in our head that's saying, give her, let's make that decision. In fact, you need this, you want that, you should pursue, you should move in that direction, whatever. And it's like, fast, right? We want it, it needs to be at speed, and there's got to be some pace associated with this. And so this isn't an easy thing for any of us to do, but I'm telling you, when that sort of dings your conscience, you got to pay attention to that tension that exists. Because if we pause, we stand a far, far, far better chance of making a wise decision, of making a good decision, and along with good decisions, fewer regrets. Now, related to this, and you've probably had this experience, I know I have, and I'm going to guess that we're not all that different here, but you're in the middle of making a decision, and in the middle of that process, and you've kind of thought through stuff, and you've kind of, you've thought through the options on whatever the decision is, and you've kind of got a plan coming together now, and nothing about the plan seems to be bothering you. It feels like this is the step, this is where I should be headed, this is what I should be doing, and then somebody comes along, and they point something out to you that you've never considered before, that you had not even thought about. And suddenly there's this tension now where there was no tension. It's usually your mom who points those things out. You ever notice that? So often it's your mother who points those things out. And it's like, yes, but have you considered that that's illegal? Whatever it may be, right? I'm just throwing that out. That's just... Sometimes it's a friend, right? Slight hesitation. You get that friend who comes along and says, hey, you know what? Maybe that does sound good to you, but have you thought about how that's going to impact or what your wife might think about that? Tension. Have you thought about what your husband's going to think about that? Tension. Does your boss know about this decision? Tension. Are you sure that you can afford that particular item? Tension. You ever had that one happen? You're ready to go, right? Like, you're going to buy it. I do that sometimes with Coca-Cola stuff. I collect old Coke junk, and I think it's not junk, but you would look at it and think it's junk, and I'm like, oh, I see something, and it's like, oh, bargain basement price, right? And I'm all in, and the sales associate in my head is ding, 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 and everything's like, and then my wife says, but have you considered, and it's like, oh, now there's tension, right? Like, are you sure that you can afford it? Are you sure that you should move in that direction? Tension. So here's the thing. As you consider your options, as that decision, you get to the crossroads, and there might be multiple sort of options, right? As you're considering your options, if there is any hesitation around a particular option, pause. Just pause. And allow that tension to rise up, to get as big as it possibly might get, before you decide. If something bothers you, let it bother you. You're thinking, wow, that just seems like odd advice. No, it's good advice. If something is bothering you about a decision, don't rush into the decision. That would seem weird. That would be the misstep. Pause. Pause with whatever is bothering you. If something doesn't seem right about him, then pause. Let that bother you. If something about her bothers you, then let that bother you, right? if there's something about that job offer or that invitation to that party or to that thing or to that event or whatever, or there's that deal, or you're looking at the fine print and you can't read it because you're my age now, right? And you're like, something about it is bothering you. Let that bother you. Just pause. Don't rush into a decision. Face that tension. Face it until either the tension goes away or you make a decision that you're going to go in a different direction. Does that make some sense? Is anybody tracking with me here? Yeah? 2 of us. Good. Now, there's this. I got to take a drink here. There's this fascinating story. It's a crazy story. And it's from the life of King David. Some of you will know King David in Scripture. And King David is Israel's second king. He's the second king. And there's this story in his life that's just, it's kind of goofy. I love this story, but it is a crazy story. And I think it really illustrates the importance of paying attention to the tension. Paying attention to the tension. Some of you might know this, but David steps onto the pages of history. When we first encountered David in the pages of history, he is a shepherd boy. You know this, some, right? He's a shepherd boy. And during that season of his life, just as a kid, just as somebody who takes care of sheep, there's this prophet that comes along, shows up at his house one day, and he had a big old family, and he's living there with his family. And this prophet shows up out of the blue, and he comes to the family and he says, you know what? God has decided that somebody in this family is going to be the next king of Israel. And it's you, David. And the rest of the family's looking and they're like, are you sure? Is this really the word from God? And it's like, what, David? He's like the runt of the family. And it's like, are you? And it's like, no, this is a real deal. This is what's happening. David has been chosen by God to be the next king of Israel. That's a good day. A prophet shows up in your house and says one of your kids is going to be the next ruler, the next leader. It's like, woohoo, right? Like, say, so this is the big deal. The problem was Israel already had a king. It was the first king of Israel, King Saul. But Saul wasn't doing a good job kinging. Can we say it that way? Saul was not doing a good job kinging. He was doing a really bad job at it. But God's decided to replace him. But it's not happening quite yet. Not quite yet. So time goes by. And you know this story, even if you're not a churchgoer, even if you don't read Scripture or any of that kind of stuff, you know this story. Time goes by and David has this legendary encounter with this Philistine Goliath, this giant, this guy named Goliath, right? And he's this big warrior dude, and we know about that story, David versus Goliath. And in the moment that David kills Goliath, which he does, the historical account of that, David immediately becomes a household name right throughout the entire kingdom of Israel. Everybody in Israel knows who David is. He's the war hero. Everybody in Philistine, all the Philistines know exactly who David is. It's not just in Israel, it's all around, the nations around. They know who David is, and that word spreads, and it didn't take long for David's popularity to exceed that of King Saul. And Saul don't like this, obviously. Saul wasn't a very good king to start with, and he becomes so incredibly jealous of David and the heights that he has achieved in terms of popularity throughout the land, and people just want to sort of know what David's doing and follow David and be about David and all this sort of stuff, and he becomes so jealous of David, he tries to kill David. He tries to take him out, and David's forced to go on the run. And he's a fugitive because he's on the run from the king, right? And so the law of the land, right? And by now, I mean, David is just legendary, right? He's hero status. I mean, everybody knows him. As far as the people of Israel are concerned, that guy is a war hero. He has a reputation not just as a warrior, but as an incredible leader. And everybody's like, David, right? Good day to be a David. And so dozens and then hundreds of dudes, they start flocking to David's side. And so he's got these guys, his posse, if you will. He had his own posse of guys, but it was like, they were like a really tiny little army. They were like this posse without a home. They were a group that was homeless. And it was a group that was made up really of people just like David who were kind of fugitives from the law. They were on the run from the king, because they were siding with David. So eventually, I'm just condensing the story here. You're getting Cole's Notes version. Saul eventually gets some really good intel on where David is. He finds out where David's at, and he gathers 3,000 soldiers. 3,000. Now we think, 3,000 doesn't seem like a lot of soldiers, but I'm telling you, in ancient times, 3,000 soldiers was a massive army. Huge. You couldn't get 3,000 men together to fight for a cause back then. Like 3,000 soldiers was huge. And he takes this group of soldiers and he heads out and he goes into what is known as the Desert of Ein Gedi. The Desert of Ein Gedi. You got to Google this because the desert. It's like southeast of Jerusalem, not far out of Jerusalem. And it's all very deserty, and then it goes right to the Dead Sea, kind of there. Ein Gedi today, like there's campgrounds there. There's like a spa there. There's a lodge. I mean, there's this pristine kind of nature reserve. There's this beach sort of set up, so it's not the Ein Gedi that was in David's day. This was just complete desert. And it really is. You just got to get closer to the water to realize these different things nowadays. Saul finds out he's in Ein Gedi, hiding out in the desert. And it's really rocky, kind of windswept, Drumheller-esque kind of stuff. Google it. Look at some pictures. It's cool. And so he's hiding. And so here comes Saul, and he's winding his way through these rocky hills of this desert Ein Gedi. And Saul stops. And he halts the entire army, 3,000 troops. And he stops them all because he has to go to the bathroom. Not joking you, this is in the Bible. He stops because Saul's like, I gotta go, guys, we gotta stop. Everybody stop, right? When the king's gotta go to the bathroom, everybody's gonna stop, right? And so King Saul needs to find somewhere where it's a little more private than right in the middle of the desert thing, right? Where he can go relieve himself. Okay? And so he sees this cave and he heads off. He walks up this hill. It's not that far. And there's this cave and he's going to go in there unaccompanied. He's all by himself, which would make sense. And he's going there. He's going to take care of business, right? And here's where we get to the crazy, crazy part of this account. This is just David and a group of his guys. They're hiding in the very cave that Saul chooses to go into. What are the odds of this? I don't know how many caves there are there, but what are the odds of this? From David's perspective, this is a crazy scenario. This might be a win-win from David's perspective. See, apparently what had happened is this. When David and his men, and he had his own intel, he kind of knew what was going on and stuff too. He got word that Saul and the army, and a big army, they're coming. And so he's like, guys, we got to scatter. We got to spread out a little bit. Why don't you hide in the hills? Let's just tuck ourselves away here as best we can. Hide in the hills. And when Saul and his men pass through, we'll come out and we'll kind of go the other way. Something, that's sort of the plan, right? And so this is kind of, everything's working according to schedule, and it seems to be going good, and they can peek around through that cave, and there goes Saul, and there goes the army, and then all of a sudden, stop! Gotta go to the bathroom! And I'm sure David was like, what is happening? And then they're in the back recesses of the cave, if you can kind of picture this, and you're in the back of that cave, and if you've been hiding out in a cave for a little bit, your eyes get used to the dark kind of thing, and so when you step into the light, it's like, poof, right? It's like, whoa, gotta get used to this a little bit. They're hiding in the back of the cave, and in comes Saul, and Saul gets off the horse or mule or whatever he was riding, and he makes his way up to this cave that David and his men, they're temporarily using as a hideout, and I mean, just imagine it from David's perspective, in the back of that cave, and you're staring out at the mouth of the cave, and it's bright out there, and you've got Saul coming in from that bright, hot Middle Eastern sun, and he can't see a thing, and he steps into that cave, and he walks just far enough into the cave as you would just to ensure some privacy. And he takes off his robe, because he's a king. He's got a kingly robe, so he takes off the robe and lays it on the ground and hikes up the outer garments and squats down there, kind of facing the opening of the cave. This is a weird story, isn't it? It's in there. You got to read your Bible. It's in there. I mean, if I'm David, it's like, this is a sign from God, right? I mean, here, God has just delivered the enemy into his hands. What else could this possibly mean? I mean, he'd already been anointed king. All the people already wanted David to be the king. Everybody knew he was next in line, that as soon as Saul is gone, David's the next king. Let's go, right? The only thing standing in David's way is the current king. And that current king isn't standing in his way right now. He's totally unguarded. He is vulnerable, and he's completely unsuspecting. And if David wasn't thinking that, which I'm quite sure he must have been, we know that the guys around him were, because they're tucked back in the cave, and it's like, Saul just came in. What's he doing? Oh, that's what he's doing. Okay, David. And David's biographer, who's writing this stuff down for us, here's what he says happened. He says his men are whispering to David in the back of the cave, and they're, David, look, this is the day. This is the day that the Lord spoke of when he said, told you a long time ago, I'm going to give your enemy into your hands to deal with as you wish. This is it. It's got to be. This must be God's plan. This must be God's will. These guys, poof, instant decision. I don't know what options were available right at that moment, but they made instant decision. Have you ever made instant decision? And then lived with more regrets because of instant decision? These guys, instant decision. Let's kill Saul and we can all go home. Because they're on the run as fugitives because of Saul. Let's kill him. We can all go home. Enough of this living out in the wilderness and running around in the desert. And, this is the perfect scenario for these guys. I mean, there's no civil war required. There's going to be minimal bloodshed. I mean, they're thinking, David, come on, man. Do it. That's what they're like, David, right? Kill the king before the king kills you. Besides, I mean, what other option is there? Like, what else are you going to do? I mean, you're going to remain an outlaw for the rest of your life? This needed to end. And from their perspective, the timing was perfect. So you can imagine the emotion in that cave on that afternoon. Imagine the pressure on David to act. David, right? Like, go get him. Here's what makes this story even more interesting. David felt something else as well. He felt tension. He felt tension about all of this. There was some hesitation because something just didn't feel quite right. Something didn't seem quite, he wasn't sure what it was because in this context, hesitation doesn't make any sense. You can't hesitate too long because he's not going to be vulnerable for too long, right? And so Saul did what I think many of us do. We act. We get going. And that's what he did. He acted. He drew his dagger and he snuck up. And he's getting closer and closer and closer to Saul, who's in this vulnerable position, who doesn't even know he's there. Every intention David had, he's going to just slit his throat and be done with it, right? If David's successful, the world as he knew it, the guys who are with him, the world as they knew it, changes immediately. It's just going to change immediately. It's going to be so much different. Instead of being a fugitive, David's going to be the king. But as he gets closer to Saul, the tension's increasing, and David paid attention to the tension. He let what was bothering him bother him. And somewhere between leaving the back of that cave, the recess of that cave where he was hiding, and getting to where Saul was at, it dawned on him. He gained some clarity. Wait a minute. I'm about to murder the king. This isn't war. This can't be right. Besides, David started thinking to himself, who put Saul on the throne of Israel in the first place? Why is Saul the king right now? Well, because God put him there. Well, who made Saul king? God made him king. Who am I to replace what God has put in place? I don't think this can be God's plan. I can't kill the king. I know the king's trying to kill me, but I can't kill the king. That's not, this is just so amazing to me. In spite of the pressure, and there was pressure, pure pressure. There's some big dudes in the back of that cave who hadn't had a shower for a long time and they just wanted to go home. And I said, go kill him, David. Do it, right? And here's David, and there's pressure to act. And in spite of the expectations of all of his men who were following him, in spite of the pressure and the expectations of his friends, David changes course. This is the part of the story where I think we all have something in common with David. Because David did not know what the outcome of killing Saul was going to be. He had no idea. He thought he did. But there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees that things were going to work out the way that he thought or he envisioned they might, or that his friends in the cave might have envisioned or thought that they were going to work out. I mean, what's going to happen here? I guess kill the king, become the king. Problem solved, right? Like, it just seems so straightforward. What's up with the hesitation, David? There's no guarantee that's going to be the outcome. Have you ever acted thinking that you know the future? How often do we make decisions because we know, we know what's on the other side, right? We're not very good future predictors. David had no guarantee what was on the other side of killing the king. And so we've got David, and he's inches away from Saul and inches away from killing him, and it dawns on him, hey, just because I kill the king doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be the king. But one thing's for certain, if I kill the king, I'm going to be known as the man who killed the king. I'm going to be known as the guy who killed the king, and that's going to be my story for the rest of my life. When people look back on the decision that I made in the cave that day, they're going to look back on it and say, well, he was the guy who killed the king. And that's now who David is, the king killer. That's going to be my legacy, right? We talk about legacy question. That's the story that I'm going to tell my children. That's the story that I'm going to have to tell my grandchildren. I'll be like, oh, Grandpa, tell us one more time how you became the king. Tell us how you snuck up on King Saul while he was going to the bathroom and you slit his throat. Oh, you're so brave, right? Like, huh? That's not the story David wanted to tell. That's not the story David once told about him. In fact, the author who's writing this account says David was conscience-stricken. Conscience-stricken. Here's why it's a conscious question for us. In fact, this is how we know that he was paying attention to this tension, because he was conscience-stricken. Somehow, some way he paid attention to his conscience. And he does something that very few people, very few of us, I think, have the self-control to be able to do. He changed course midstream. He changed course kind of mid-action, mid-decision. Instead of murdering Saul, you know what he did? He had that dagger out already. He cut off a corner of the robe. Saul had thrown his robe down, right, before he was going to do what he was doing. And so he throws his robe down on the ground, and David went up there, and instead of killing Saul, he cut the corner off his robe. And then he snuck back into the recesses of the cave. And his men are there, and they're like, what are you doing? What is happening? And David whispers to them, and here's what he said. He says, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed. Saul finishes what he was doing in the cave, and he walks out of the cave, and he goes on his way, having no idea how close he came to losing his life in those moments. And Saul rejoins his men, and he gets back up on his horse or his mule or his donkey or whatever he was riding, and he's preparing to continue on his search for David through this desert wilderness. And suddenly, there's a voice that's calling out his name. Saul! Saul! And 3,000 soldiers plus Saul all stop, and they turn their heads and they look back. And there at the cave entrance where Saul just was is David. Well, that's the guy they're hunting. This is the man that, as a soldier, I've been paid to kill, to find and kill. The giant killer David. Here he is. He's standing at the mouth of the cave that Saul just exited. Can you imagine the drama in that moment? And David's holding something in his hand, and it's a piece of cloth. Well, that looks like royal cloth. And he's, Saul, well, what is he hold? And Saul's sitting there on his horse, and he grabs his robe, and he pulls it around, and he looks, and corner of his robe is sliced right off. Well, he's holding the corner. Oh, right? Right in that moment. I mean, actually, David bowed down to Saul in that moment. And all of those 3,000 troops and all of David's men in the back of that cave, at that moment, they realized, David's the better man. David's the hero of his own story once again. He spared Saul's life, and everybody there knew that Saul would have taken David's. And then he gives this short speech. You can read it for yourself. It's in 1 Samuel in the Bible. David concludes with this powerful, powerful statement. I think it's a statement we should all take to heart. He says to Saul, everybody's listening there, he says, "May the Lord judge between you and me." Let's let God be the judge of all this. I'm just going to wait. I'm going to allow God to determine the outcome to all of this conflict. I'm not going to step in and determine the outcome. I'm not going to take your life. I'm not going to take matters into my own hands. You're the king. I'm not going to replace what God has put in place. I'm not going to use your bad behavior, Saul, to encourage me or to allow me or to excuse me to do dumb things or to do bad things. And now all eyes, David finishes speaking and they're like, And then they turn and look at Saul. Now what, Saul? Now what? Saul's sitting there and he's been humiliated by David. He wasn't humiliated by David's military skill. He was humiliated by David's humility. So what do you do now? You're King Saul. You continue to pursue this man who moments before could have taken your life but chose not to, who just said he's not going to take your life, that that's not part of the game for him, that he's not pursuing this, that this isn't going to be a part, that God will decide, God will judge. Saul knows better than to run up the hill and kill David. He turns the army around, heads back home. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you want to be the hero of your story? Would you like to be the hero of your own story? Because you get to choose. You get to choose. You know those books, Choose Your Own Adventure? And you get to the page and it's like, you want to do option A or B, and you choose A or B, and you read on that, and maybe you don't know those books. You get to choose your story. Back to what we talked about previously. Do you want to write a story that you will be proud to tell? That you will be proud for your children to tell and your grandchildren to hear about and to learn about? That's my dad. That's my mom. That's my grandmother. That's my grandfather. Then I'm telling you, pay attention to the tension. Months later, Saul and his army, they're embroiled in this incredible battle, again with the Philistines, that they just knocked heads all the time. And he's in this battle, and there's an archer, and they would have archers back behind the lines, right? Just right, and they just shoot, and it was random. You've seen it in the movies and stuff. It'd be sort of these random shots just shooting onto the other side and hoping, and randomly, we don't know where that arrow is going to land, and there's this archer, we don't even know who he was, and he shoots this arrow, and there's Saul on the other side, and poof, and he got him. It got him where there was no armor, and it was a mortal shot, and he's dying. And he does not want to die at the hands of the Philistines. So he pulls out his own sword and he does himself in. He falls on his own sword. And the Israelite army that day just got routed. And word reaches back to the city, and the citizens of the primary city in the land at that time, they proclaim David as king. And David becomes the king without having to murder the king. And I wonder if David thought to himself, man, a few weeks ago here, if somebody had told me that it was going to work out like that, boy, it sure would have made that whole cave episode go a little smoother, right? Like, man, that wouldn't have been as stressful, and it would have been a lot. If God had just showed up and said, hey, David, relax, because 7 chapters from now, as it's 7 chapters between, 7 chapters from now, the Philistines are going to take care of Saul for you. Whew, wouldn't have that made things so much easier if he had just known that? But you know this. I know this. That's not how life works, right? That's not how life works, right? That's right. It's why we have to pay attention to the tension. It's why whenever you're making a decision of any consequence, you got to stop and you got to ask yourself, is there a tension that deserves my attention? If there is something in you, if there's something in you that you can't quite put your finger on, can't quite figure this out, or maybe somebody else is, they've raised something and they can't quite put their finger on it either, right? Maybe it's about an option that you're considering, a decision that you're weighing, and it's bothering you. Or it wasn't, but they brought something up and now it's bothering you. Would you just stop? Pay attention. and give it some time and let it percolate and let it bother you until you know why it bothers you. Don't ignore it. Don't brush by it. Don't rush through it. It may be, I don't know this, but it may be God's way of protecting you. Maybe God's way of protecting somebody you know or love, somebody close to you. This might be God's way of keeping you from a decision that when you look back and see the story that you regret. Maybe it's God's way of keeping you from a decision that you regret. So here's the question. Is there a tension that deserves your attention? Is there a tension that deserves your attention? Every time you consider an option, every time you get to the decision point, every time you're making a decision of any consequence, just stop and ask the question, is there any tension here that deserves my attention? And if so, pay attention to the tension. Because like David, you will be so glad that you did. We're going to pick it up there next time. We're going to explore the fourth question in this series. It's a maturity question, but I want to pray for you before we go. So let's just do that. Father God, what a group, what a church family that you have brought us all to be a part of. And I'm so thankful that we are able to gather here freely and that we can learn about you, that we can sing about you. This is so good, God. Thank you that we're here today. God, there's a reason why each one of us is here today. And maybe that reason, God, is because we're in the throes of a decision. There's some here right today who are in the middle of a decision, or there's decisions looming and we know they are, and God, we want to make the best decisions we possibly can. We don't want to get on the other side of that decision and live with any regret. So help us, God, to make better decisions. Help us, God, to explore this idea of whether there's tension that exists in the decision right in the moment, and for us to just try to understand that tension, why it's there. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe, God, you've got something else in store for us, and that tension is there to get our attention. God, help us to not rush into things when there's a tension. This is our prayer, God, and we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great afternoon, and we'll pick it up again next Sunday. Take care. Yeah.